In this video, we will discuss how to recognize and use forms of valid and invalid arguments. Some background information to know are some variations of the conditional. We have discussed the conditional before. That is an if-then statement. The conditional in symbolic form is P with an arrow and then Q, which is if P, then Q. For a converse of the statement, you interchange the antecedent and the consequent. So the converse of the conditional is if Q, then P. For the inverse of the conditional, you negate the antecedent and the consequent. If not P, then not Q. And the contrapositive, with the contrapositive, you interchange the antecedent and the consequent, and you negate each of those. If not Q, then not P. If we were to make truth tables of all of these statements, what can be found is that a conditional statement and its contrapositive are equivalent. So the conditional statement and its contrapositive are equivalent, meaning they will have the same truth values in each condition. And then the converse and the inverse are equivalent to one another. There are some standard form of arguments. These are arguments that, if they are in this form, notice the top four, all of these are considered valid arguments, and the bottom four, anything of this pattern, would be considered an invalid argument. If you look at what's presented here under the valid arguments, we have direct reasoning, contrapositive reasoning. Notice that has to do with the contrapositive that was discussed. We have disjunctive reasoning, and we have transitive reasoning. In the invalid arguments, we have fallacy of the converse, fallacy of the inverse. Those have to do with the fact that the converse and the inverse are not equivalent to the conditional. Then we have misuse of disjunctive reasoning and misuse of transitive reasoning. If you look at our examples from earlier in this section, you will find that our example 1 was a valid argument, and it followed the disjunctive reasoning that's listed there. If you look at our example 2, you would find that it was invalid, and it actually is an example of the fallacy of the inverse. So any English argument that translates into one of these forms, you can determine its validity based on its form. Now, not all arguments will be in a standard form of an argument, so when that occurs, a truth table is necessary to determine validity. We are able to use the standard form of arguments to draw logical conclusions. A logical or valid conclusion is one that forms a valid argument when it follows a given set of premises. Example 3 states, use the standard forms of valid arguments to draw a valid conclusion from the given premises. Premise 1 is, if I am a full-time student, I cannot work. Premise 2 is, if I cannot work, I cannot afford a rental apartment costing more than $1,200 per month. And we are asked to find a valid conclusion, what statement can follow from these premises. So we want to let P be the statement, I am a full-time student. And we will let Q be the statement, I can work. We will let R be the statement, I can afford a rental apartment costing more than $1,200 per month. So let's examine what we are given. In symbolic form, premise 1, if I am a full-time student, which is P, the consequent is I cannot work, which would be the negation of Q. The second premise is if I cannot work, so that's negation of Q. If I cannot work, I cannot afford a rental apartment costing more than $1,200 per month. That would be not R. And we want to be able to draw a valid conclusion from those two premises. So what you want to notice is that you have two conditional statements. Also, you want to notice that the consequent of the first conditional matches the antecedent of the second conditional. If we look to our standard forms of an argument, we want to be looking at the valid arguments only. We can see in transitive reasoning, we have two conditional statements. It doesn't matter that in the example, in the chart, those are both Q's, and the example we have here, they're both not Q's. You're looking at the pattern. It's the idea that the two parts match. The consequent of the first statement and the antecedent of the second statement match. And so we can give either one of these conclusions would be valid. Notice you're just taking the antecedent from the first and then the consequent from the second. So in our example, what that would mean is we could make a conclusion if P, then not R. So the conclusion in words now would be if I am a full-time student, and our consequent would be not R, which is I cannot afford a rental apartment costing more than $1,200 per month. Notice the conclusion that we come to is still a conditional statement. So depending on the types of premises you are given, you want to be looking at the valid arguments and making a valid conclusion from those premises.